There are a number of options that individuals and households have to become more environmentally friendly and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, as the easy-to-implement, inexpensive options become exhausted, it becomes increasingly difficult to find affordable alternatives.
Inexpensive options to lower emissions. Some of the easy, inexpensive options include installing programmable thermostats to decrease the amount of energy needed to heat a household during the night or when people are away. Recycling items such as paper and cardboard, bottles and cans, glass and plastic, organic waste, and items that you may have to take to a special location to recycle, such as electronics, tires, and large appliances. Reducing water use and total energy needed to treat water by making sure there are no leaks in pipes and faucets and toilets. Running dishwasher with full loads. Running washing machines with full loads. Taking shorter showers or taking showers instead of baths. Watering lawns early or late in the day and not overwatering. Planting flowers, trees, and vegetables that require lower amounts of water. Using LED or other low-power consuming lights. Using appliances such as washing machines, refrigerators, and dishwashers that are energy efficient. Using furnaces or air conditioning units that are energy efficient. Closing blinds or drapes on hot days to reduce heat flow into a house. Switching from a gas lawnmower to an electric lawnmower. Walking or biking for short trips. Taking public transit where possible, such as trips between home and work. Planning trips for groceries and errands so the number of trips taken per month can be reduced. For example, you can pick up supplies such as pens or hardware items at the same time as a trip to the grocery store. Reducing the number of long-distance vacations, either by vehicle or plane. Working remotely if possible. This includes having remote meetings instead of long-distance meetings that require travel to another city. Moderately expensive options to lower emissions. In addition to the easy, inexpensive things that households can do to reduce energy use and emissions, there are also a few options that have an intermediate cost. These are usually one-time that will lead to a reduction in energy usage. These options usually cost a few $1,000s, but should provide lasting reductions in energy usage. These options will be available to a smaller number of households due to the cost, which often includes the cost of installation. Some of these options include upgrading house insulation, switching to furnaces or air conditioning units that are energy efficient, replacing doors and windows with more efficient varieties, replacing an older garage door that is leaking air with an insulated garage door that seals better. Landscaping upgrades to convert yards so they use less water and require lower maintenance. High-cost options to lower emissions. The final category of options for a household to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are high-cost options. These options usually cost $5,000 to $20,000 or more. These options are focused toward longer-term gains that need several years of usage for the gain to be realized. These include installing solar panels, usually on the roof of the household or building. Adding large storage batteries to capture energy generated from solar panels. This allows energy to be available during evenings and cloudy days. Switching from a combustion engine vehicle to an electric vehicle. Installing a quick charging station for electric vehicles. Potential versus realized personal emission reduction. Currently, households in Canada are responsible for about 40% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions every year. A little more than half of that is through personal transportation, and the rest comes from activities and consumption within and around a house or apartment. Most of this is electricity use and energy used in home heating. This translates to about 0.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions every year. Several reductions in emissions attributed to households have already been realized. This includes reduced emissions for home temperature regulation by using programmable thermostats and from the installation of efficient furnaces, air conditioners, and heat pumps. It also includes using more efficient appliances, which is the result of churn from moving away from high-energy use appliances. Generally, you cannot purchase new appliances that are inefficient, since they have been phased out over the last 20 years. For the 22% or so of Canada's emissions that are driven by personal transportation, there is a slow trend towards adoption of electric vehicles. Over time, this will make a significant dent in personal emissions. However, the cost of electric vehicles is still too expensive for many people, even when rebates are factored in. In addition, for some people, such as seniors or retired individuals or individuals that work at home, they may not drive enough to offset the initial emissions that result from the production of electric vehicles and their batteries. For example, if someone drives less than 2,000 kilometers per year, it's likely that the emissions released from production of the electric vehicle will be greater than the emissions generated from driving a combustion engine vehicle for 10 years. This may change in the future, but for now, the electric vehicle solution is not a good fit for everybody. The potential for reduction of emissions for many existing households is much less than it was in the past. This is because for a household who uses a programmable thermostat and has installed insulation and an efficient furnace, it has already achieved a large percentage of the affordable emission reductions possible. These reductions in emissions are only achieved once. Even if a household still has a few reduction options available, it is likely that they will be costly and unaffordable. Without new options, a household may have already achieved most of what it is able to do in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction. The difficulty in overall emissions reductions from households. Often in countries such as Canada, we have set targets for overall total emission levels by a certain date. One of the major challenges in achieving total emissions reductions in countries that are growing at a relatively fast pace is the additional emissions that are the result of population growth. In most developed countries, this is usually the result of immigration. Even though the average amount of greenhouse gas generated per person or per household has decreased over time, the overall emissions have increased as a result of a large increase in population. If the average household has reduced its emissions by 20%, there is still often an overall increase in emissions. For example, if a city increases from 1 to 1.5 million people, and the average reduction in emissions per person is 20%, overall emissions will still increase. If the average emissions per person, over time, is reduced from 10 units to 8 units annually, but at the same time, the population goes from 1 to 1.5 million, overall emissions for the city will go from 10 million to 12 million units, a 20% increase. Although there's been a significant reduction in the average greenhouse gas footprint per person, population increase has more than offset this reduction. Even with significant population growth, Canada could achieve an overall reduction of 20% from households, including personal transportation. This would only represent 0.1% reduction in global emissions. Every affordable, easy-to-do change that releases fewer emissions into the atmosphere should be practiced. However, to put this in perspective, if Canada was able to reduce total household emissions by 20% for 30 years, this would be offset by China's greenhouse gas emissions in 1 month. What are possible solutions to reducing emissions given the limited options and impact of individuals and households? Firstly, we need to be honest with individuals about the amount they can impact greenhouse gas emissions by changing their behavior. Canada and other regions need to align the timing and scope of the transition burden we put on Canadian citizens and business with other countries. Otherwise, we risk not being able to compete in the global market, significantly increasing the cost of living, deterring investment both locally and from abroad, devaluing individual savings, and pushing a large segment of the population to poverty and food banks. Individuals should know what makes the biggest difference from the options they have. They will need to be informed of any new energy-efficient solutions that become commercially available and affordable, so they can move towards them. However, due to the limitations and the expense of some of these options, most of the energy that consumers use will have to become more efficient and emit lower amounts of greenhouse gases at the source. Governments will also have to closely look at standards and regulations for new construction and major renovations. By setting standards that significantly reduce the amount of energy a building requires, they can lower the carbon footprint of a structure from day one. This is far less expensive than having to modify a building after it's been built. They can also set regulations that make tools more standard. This will reduce energy requirements since fewer tools will need to be manufactured and purchased. Overall, less tools will be needed to do several different jobs.
The transition to more efficient and environmentally friendly power sources is an extremely expensive transition. It will cost tens of billions of dollars over several years for most developed countries. Power plants will have to be constructed or converted, new transmission lines will have to be constructed, and existing ones upgraded. Millions of electric vehicles will have to be manufactured. A large percentage of car batteries will have to be made from materials other than lithium and cobalt. Electric vehicles will have to be continually improved so they can travel further on a single charge. Also, charging speeds and availability of charging stations will also have to be increased. Combined with education, these larger region-wide solutions will have to be easily available for individuals so that they can significantly reduce their environmental footprint. The greatest reductions in the average amounts of greenhouse gas emissions per person can only be achieved with affordable, efficient energy sources and significant investment in utilities and power transmission corridors. These energy sources need to be readily accessible to consumers.